This is Meena here, extending a very warm welcome to my channel Grow Joyfully. In the second video on worm facts and their applications, we'll look at some more new facts and how to apply them diligently in order to get high quality vermicompost and also a good increase in population of the worms. Worms are great foodies and non-fussy too. They eat anything that is biodegradable, that is of plant or animal origin. Decaying organic matter is something that they love to feast on. While they are voracious eaters, it hardly costs us anything to feed the worms. The food that we give to the worms is in two forms. One is the brown matter, which is present in the bedding, high in carbon. It provides the worms with energy. And then there is a green matter we provide in the form of vegetable and fruit peels, etc. Greens are essential in helping the worms grow and breed. But what we should avoid completely is non-biodegradable items. We cannot give plastic, glass, metal and other non-organic items. And also no cooked items, dairy products, masala stuff, etc. With respect to what they gorge on, earthworms do have preferences and limitations. This is a very big topic for successful breeding of worms. Worms do not have teeth, so they just suck the food inside. The food reaches an organ called as the crop, which is like a temporary storage chamber. Subsequently, it reaches another organ called gizzard. This is where grinding happens. In nature, sand and other fine grit work in order to grind the food in a worm's gizzard. But we need to simulate this explicitly in the bedding, and hence it's important to add soil, powdered eggshells or sand in moderation. A handful in our bin will do to act like grid. Once the food is ground, it passes through the worm's intestine where the nutrients are absorbed. The undigested material is excreted through the anus in pellets. We call them as worm poop or excreta or castings. As they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure. So what the worms do not want and they excrete is castings, which is treasure for us. This is what we are eagerly waiting for in vermicomposting. Castings are rich in nutrients and microbes and they do wonder for our plants. In this series of videos, I am recommending starting with 100 or 150 worms in a tub. So you may be interested, how do we scale up? How soon the population will increase in the bin? So we need to understand the reproductive cycle and the lifespan of worms. Let me quickly explain this. Worms are hermaphrodites, meaning they are both male and female at the same time. But self-fertilization doesn't happen. 2 adult worms are required. When you look at a worm, you can see that there is a fleshy band, a distinct swelling that you can notice near the head. And that indicates that the worm is adult and it is ready to reproduce. 2 adult worms line up in opposite directions near their clitellum. And they remain attached for about 15 minutes and they exchange sperm cells. And a few days later, the eggs come in contact with the sperm cells and the clitellum forms what is called as a cocoon or an egg case. The cocoon is the size of an apple. It's like a small capsule. It gets separated from the body of the worm, so it falls into the soil or the worm bedding. And 2 to 5 embryonic worms may be present in one cocoon. It all depends upon the species. And the cocoons take anywhere from 21 to 28 days to hatch. And juvenile worms come out. And in about 2 months, they are ready to breed. So roughly, we can say the worm population doubles in 3 months. Worms can also live for about 1 year in the worm bin. For some species, the lifespan is even 3 to 4 years. But if a worm dies in your bin, you probably will not notice at all because the worm's body is about 90% water. So it shrivels up and it becomes part of the compost or the bedding material rather quickly. Sometimes we may have some doubts like this. If I take care of the worms' requirements in terms of their food ambience and shelter, will the population explode? Then will my bin become too small to support such a huge population? Or you may have another question like this. Suppose I go on a vacation for about 2 to 3 weeks and I don't have anyone to take care of the bin. What happens to my worms? We need to understand that the worm bin is a self-regulating ecosystem. The available food, space, oxygen, and even the number of predators regulate the worm reproduction rates and hence the population in nature. If you observe that you have too many worms for the space that is available in your bin, you have two options. You can create another batch in another bin, transfer some of the worms, or you might be able to gift some worms to your friends to help them kickstart their joyful journey in vermicomposting. What happens when there is a population explosion and we do not take any action at all? Well, the food availability will become low and actually worms shrink in size. And they get back to the original size once there is ample food. But if they do not have ample food, then they will not reproduce rapidly at all. If environmental conditions are not ideal, cocoons can even delay hatching for up to 2 years. If conditions are not favorable, worms will either slow down their reproduction and maintain their population level. They may even die off in order to make room for the babies. So when the food is very scarce, the adult worms die off, their bodies decompose very quickly, releasing nitrogen and other nutrients. A point to note here, during harvest, observe whether you have a healthy mix of worms. That is, you need to have a good combination of adults, juveniles, babies, and cocoons if at all you can see them. But if any one category is predominant, that means only adults or only babies, it indicates that something is not okay in the bin, and it's a signal for us to take action immediately. Worms do not interbreed, so a red wiggler mates only with a red wiggler and it doesn't mate with African nightcrawler. So we can technically place worms of different species in the same bin. There will not be any aggression or infighting that happens between two different species of worms. We can mix different worm species with each other in the same bin. However, experienced vermicomposters do not recommend this at all because different species have different habits. Some species eat more than others, some breed faster than others, some prefer to stay on top, some burrow deep. Some species are more resilient to temperature fluctuations than others. And of course, it's got a lot to do with certain conditions present in the worm bin like temperature, space, and moisture level. But for us, in the beginning, it may become difficult for us to manage. And hence, we suggest that we keep one species per bin. Suppose you keep two different species in the same bin. Please keep an eye. When you notice a species starting to take over another in terms of population, it's always a good idea to quarantine the less dominating species into a new worm bin so that you don't lose that particular species altogether. Worms do take time to settle down in a specific environment, but once they settle down, they resist any kind of change. They are pretty uncomfortable with changes. Worms signal their resistance to change by trying to escape from the bin. If you find too many worms suddenly on the surface or trying to walk along the walls of your bin, that means they are trying to escape. Some changes are unavoidable. If you're starting a new bedding, a new batch, you need to transfer the bins to a new bedding in a new bin. So here we have already mentioned that keep a light on for a few days until the worms settle down, or keep some dry newspaper on top. The worms will not try to escape. The same holds good when you add top-up bedding also. The existing worms in the bin do experience some discomfort when we add new worms in between. So this is a controllable factor. Try to add all the worms upfront when you start a new batch. I have shared 2 videos on the very important topic of feeding the worms with greens. I hope you do see them. We do focus on giving a balanced diet with a variety of food with respect to greens, but I would suggest understanding what your worms like and do not like through observations for a few batches. I stick to giving healthy food to the worms and what the worms like. For example, through observation, if I find that cabbage is not eaten by worms or it takes much longer time for worms to eat, that means they are eating it very reluctantly, I would rather not put it. I can always toss the cabbage into my aerobic composting bin. And definitely, please do not put what they don't like acidic stuff, dairy products, etc. Please do not experiment in your bin. This is not a lab scenario. Quite a lot of research has happened in terms of what is good for worms and what is not. So let us stick to what is already very well known. Worms also escape from the bin when the ambience turns harmful to them. I will discuss this very important topic in the next video. In the next video, I'll share some more worm facts with respect to their social behavior and their responses to unfavorable conditions in the bin. Thank you for watching my video. Have a great day.